has a voice, and it's gonna be heard. Bringing you news you can use and facts that you cannot doubt. Hey.
Hey, what's up everybody? It is Thursday, 8 p.m. I am actually doing a show this week. Everything in my home is back to normal. If you watched the show last week, then you saw that I had a mild incident at my house with my kid and my pet, but it's all good now. So first, I'm going to start off with some One Purpose magazine updates. We have a couple new articles up. If you visit www.onepurposemagazine.com, you can find a few new articles there. I think they're very interesting. One, we have some money saving tips, and we have a great freelancer who contributed a piece to the magazine. So if you have time, go check it out. www.onepurposemagazine.com. As far as more updates with the magazine, you can join the newsletter once you go to the magazine's website, and you'll get weekly updates. Every Saturday, I try to throw a newsletter in there. If not on Saturdays, then definitely later, with good things to think about before you get your week started so that you can have a good, prosperous week. So that's that with One Purpose Magazine updates. And I always try to give a self-love message. What better day to give a self-love message than on Valentine's Day, which is when I'm recording. But love never ends. Love never stops. Continue to love on each other, love on yourself throughout the week. I have a new show that I recorded on Valentine's Day for my podcast, One Purpose Magazine Blog Talk Radio Show. So if you go to 1ptalk.com, you'll find that conversation about self-love right at that website. It's the latest talk. It's about 15 minutes, not talking you to death, not talking you crazy, but it's about self-love. So you can go ahead and go there and listen to that chat and be inspired, encouraged to love yourself. Why not? If you don't love you, who else will? So moving on to my topics. I love having this face-to-face dialogue, but I haven't come up yet with my technology. So my monitor has to be off to my left a little bit, but it's cool. So we have some topics today that is kind of falling into all mental health conversations, which is a good thing because we love to talk about mental health. We love talking about things that make us better as people, but I'm going to dive into something that segues into mental health issues, but it's definitely a culture issue. So a culture topic that I'm going to talk about is racial PTSD, racial trauma. Do you think that Black people realize that there might be some underlying symptoms from racial trauma? We are, as a people, so resilient and forgiving that I don't think that some of our issues derive from that was caused by our own doing type of place. So I decided to do a little research and kind of rethink some things that I myself have experienced. So I'm aware of many Black people that think we are overstudied, over-stigmatized, over-diagnosed, and many are just over it. But I also understand that they are over it because they see people show up to do their evaluations and studies, but they do not see much of a change from the information that they were voluntarily given, right, for people to do these studies. But I'm not one of those Black people. I think that it all is relevant. I know that many researchers invest in doing the work with the hope that some people will invest in what their work has discovered, right? Finding the money for change is the hard part in researching and changing communities. What we do know is that there are millions of Americans, Black Americans, that suffer with racial trauma. In the smallest way of just being followed around a high-end store to profile and accused of something you did that you did not do by the police. Huge problem. All of us have a story, right? Mine came later in life. I may have experienced racial I probably had some racial driven experience earlier in life, younger, but it was probably normalized and I thought nothing of it. But the time that made me say, whoa, was in law school while getting my professional graduate degree. So I'm gonna try to make a long story short. I think I told this story before. I don't know if it was on this platform, but I was sitting in class one day and it looks like a typical 9-to-5 worker. He was a white guy, walked into class late and he demanded me to get out of my seat. And so I was just like, excuse me? So apparently, I don't know if maybe I missed a day or something like that, and he sat in my seat because the teacher had assigned seats for asking questions. I thought it was a little ancient to do, but whatever. So he sat in my seat the day that I wasn't there, so I guess he thought that it wasn't my assigned seat. So the audacity of him to demand me to get out of the seat that was assigned to me, and just to think that I would actually do so, I don't think that he thought that because I was, you know, there. I believe he thought that he had the power to do that, one, because I was black, second, because I was a woman. And I think that that attitude is just ingrained in the culture and the environments of especially many white men. But I had an entourage of women who I didn't even have to say anything. They were like, excuse me? And it was different nationalities of women, and he just kind of went back to his seat and kind of sat there and shrunk a little bit, which he should have. He should have felt embarrassed, but I just know that he felt privileged and entitled to do that because of who he. So an assessment by Williams M.T. Metzger out of UConn did an assessment of assessing racial trauma within DSM-5 framework, and it was published in the UConn. It's Racial Ethnic Stress and Trauma Survey, Practice Innovations. So PTSD caused by racism or racial trauma is likely to be under-recognized due to a lack of awareness among clinicians, discomfort surrounding conversations about race in therapeutic settings, and a lack of validated measures for its assessment. Clinical impact statement that came out of the survey is that conversations about race are often uncomfortable, and as a result are avoided by clinicians to the detriment of their clients of color who may be suffering from the traumatizing impact of racism. When there is an identifiable index trauma, which is criterion A, re-experiencing the trauma, which is criterion B, avoidance of trauma, reminders, criterion C, negative mood and cognitions, criterion D, and hyperarousal, criterion E. However, all symptoms of PTSD may be present due to racial trauma, even if a criterion A event cannot be identified. The DSM-5 limits what is identified as a traumatic experience to direct exposure to physical and sexual violence, up to and including actual death, repeated exposure of traumatic information in a work setting, and indirect exposure by way of receiving news of traumatic event involving a close friend or loved one. So this may preclude a PTSD diagnosis even if all symptoms are present. However, if the nature of the trauma does not meet DSM-5 criteria, PTSD may still be diagnosed based on ICD-9, which is a criteria, based on an ICD-9 criteria, which is the International Classification of Diseases, because it does not explicitly restrict the types of traumas that may result in a diagnosis of PTSD. What is the DSM-5? It is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the fifth edition. I believe that everyone should be familiar with the DSM-5. So speaking of DSM-5, I am transitioning to our topic of personality disorder versus mental illness. What is personality disorder? A personality disorder is a way of thinking, feeling, and behaving that deviates from the expectations of the culture, causes stress or problems functioning, and lasts over time. According to the American Psychiatric Association, there are 10 specific types of personality disorders. Personality disorders are long-term patterns of behavior and inner experiences that differ significantly from what is expected. The pattern of experience and behavior begins by late adolescence or early adulthood and causes distress or problems in functioning. Without treatment, personality disorders can be long-lasting. Personality disorders affect at least 2 of these areas below, which is what I'm going to read to you. Way of thinking about oneself and others, way of responding emotionally, way of relating to other people, way of controlling one's behavior. Types of personality disorders can get very, very convoluted, but they are antisocial personality disorders. It's a pattern of disregarding or violating the rights of others. A person with antisocial personality disorder may not conform to social norms, may repeatedly lie or deceive others, or may act impulsively. Avoidant personality disorder, a pattern of extreme shyness, feelings of inadequacy, and extreme sensitivity to criticism. People with avoidant personality disorder may be unwilling to get involved with people unless they are certain of being liked, be preoccupied with being criticized or rejected, or may view themselves as not being good enough or socially inept. Borderline personality disorder is a pattern of instability in personal relationships, intense emotions, poor self-image, and impulsive activity. A person with borderline personality disorder may go to great lengths to avoid being abandoned, have repeated suicide attempts, display inappropriate intense anger, or have ongoing feelings of emptiness. Dependent personality disorder is a pattern of needing to be taken care of and submissive and clingy behavior. People with dependent personality disorder may have difficulty making daily decisions without reassurance from others, or feel uncomfortable or helpless when alone because of fear of inability to take care of themselves. Histrionic personality disorder, a pattern of excessive emotion and attention seeking. People with histrionic personality disorder may be uncomfortable when they are not the center of attention, may use physical appearance to draw attention to themselves, or have rapidly shifting exaggerated emotions. One that we talked about maybe not last week, the week before. Narcissistic personality disorder, a pattern of need of admiration and lack of empathy. We don't have to go deep into that. We already talked about that, right? So obsessive compulsive personality disorder, a pattern of preoccupation with orderliness, perfection, and control. Paranoid personality disorder, a pattern of being suspicious of others and seeing them as a means of spiteful. People with paranoid personality disorder often assume people will harm or deceive them. Schizoid personality disorder, being detached from social relationships and expressing little emotion. A person with schizoid personality disorder typically does not seek close relationships. And schizotypal personality disorder, a pattern of being very uncomfortable in close relationships, having distorted thinking and eccentric behavior. A person with this type of personality disorder may have odd beliefs or odd or peculiar behavior or speech, may have excessive social anxiety. So a diagnosis of personality disorder requires a mental health professional. Point blank in the period. Looking at long-term patterns of functioning and symptoms, diagnosis is typically made in individuals 18 or older. People under 18 are typically not diagnosed with personality disorders because their personalities are still developing. And there is a great review that I pulled the following information from that is on www.bmj.com. I'll post it at the bottom of this video. And it just defines what mental illness is. And mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotions, thinking, and behavior, or a combination of these. Mental illnesses are associated with distress and or problems functioning in social, work, and family activities. We're keeping it all on the surface here. So it refers collectively to all diagnosable mental orders, health conditions involving significant changes in thinking, emotion, and behavior, distress, and or problems functioning in social work or family activities. Personality disorder is viewed as different from mental illness because it is more persistent throughout adult life, whereas mental illness results from a morbid process of some kind and has a more recognizable onset and time course, possibly. So yeah, we already went over the definitions. So just to segue a little bit, COVID-19 has challenged the mental health of everyone, but especially our beloved healthcare workers. There are so many articles and studies as of late of different ways our healthcare workers have been diagnosed with psychological impact of COVID-19 and other viral epidemics on frontline healthcare workers, and ways to, and this study gave ways to address it. So in this study, I'm just going to call out some of the results from their study. And it's talk about, as the world battles with COVID-19 pandemic, frontline healthcare workers are among the most vulnerable groups of risk of mental health problems. The many risks to the well-being of healthcare workers are not well understood, and I don't feel like they have ever been well understood. I always talk about an article that I wrote, a 14-page article that I wrote interviewing nurses, and I'm really grabbing an understanding of some of the emotional trauma, mental trauma that they go through by being a frontline caretaker or a health worker